Many symptoms, one cause. Now, heavy porn users arrive at our site with lots of different symptoms. In no particular order, we filled up the page with the most common ones. There are a lot more. Now, it's quite true that many people don't make the connection between their symptoms and porn use, though it's surprising to me that a 20-year-old with erectile dysfunction doesn't make the connection. To me, it makes perfect biological sense that these many symptoms arise from one cause, and that is the numbing of the pleasure response in the reward circuitry and, of course, the rewiring of the brain. And how do we know this? Well, we can't look into the brain, at least not yet, but as they say, the proof is in the pudding, because many of these symptoms fade away as heavy users get off of porn. So what do you do if you have a porn addiction? Well, that's a really big question. First of all, recovering from any addiction is complex and involves changes on many levels. Now, this presentation is focusing on the brain mechanics, and that's where I'm going to stay. So the question is, what do you do if you have numbed out your pleasure response and you've rewired your brain? Well, you take a time out. I know that may not sound easy, but that's what you want to do. Now, there's a lot more about that on our website. We call this rebalancing your brain, and it's absolutely necessary. It has two parts. The first part is reboot, and that's the idea of restoring the sensitivity of your reward circuitry. That means to replenish your dopamine receptors. And number two, you have rewire, which is basically to unlearn and relearn. And that involves weakening your addiction pathways and, of course, strengthening your rational, logical pathways. So the best way to reboot and rewire is actually to give your brain a rest from all sexual, well, all at least intense sexual stimulation, such as porn, masturbation, orgasm, and sexual fantasy. And wait until it comes back to normal responsiveness. Yeah, I know it may sound funny to stop masturbation, but masturbation is tightly linked to porn fantasy, and that can really trigger you into using again and also activate those addiction pathways. So if you do masturbate during this rebalancing period, really focus in on the sensations and skip the fantasy. Here's rebooting, which means to restore reward circuitry sensitivity. And we have that picture again. The top synapse has very few receptors, and the bottom synapse has more receptors. So you're trying to move from the top synapse, which is where you probably are now if you're addicted, down to the bottom synapse and restore sensitivity. So you're trying to increase the number of dopamine receptors. So just remember that overstimulation caused the nerve cells to protect themselves, and they reduced the dopamine receptors. And if you remember, numb brains are desperate for stimulation, and of course that is the root of cravings. So as time passes, without porn, you'll sprout more and more receptors, and the cravings will weaken. Not sure how long this takes, but it's not necessarily a linear process. As time goes on, you'll experience more and more pleasure from everyday activities. That's what porn users or former porn users report. Basically, what you're doing is healing your brain. Now think about this. If you've sprained an ankle, it really is best to stay off that ankle and allow it to heal. If you test that ankle, you're likely to increase your healing time. So this is the second thing you want to do. You want to rewire, which means to unlearn and to relearn. Do you remember this slide from earlier? This is the addicted state. What you have is a really strong go-for-it pathway, and at the same time you have a really weak impulse control pathway, the think-about-it pathway. And in this state, it's really easy to follow the path of least resistance, which is the yellow arrow. And why is that? Because that arrow leads to your reward circuit, and your reward circuit is screaming, do it. Here's how you want your brain to look like. You want to have even blue and even yellow. Here's another clever saying. When neurons fire apart, wires depart. That's the unlearning aspect. So when you stop using porn, the porn pathways start to weaken. That was the yellow pathway. And since you are using your impulse control, those think about it pathways will get stronger. So this process, of course, can be difficult at first. There's no denying that, because the brain can no longer rely upon the artificially intense fix of dopamine that porn provides. However, as time goes on, this becomes easier because your reward circuit comes back into balance, and actually you sort of let the grass grow on your porn and porn fantasy circuits, which is really good. Now, as I said before, these pathways may weaken, the addiction pathways might weaken, but they probably will never completely disappear. So it's a real good idea to be aware of your cues and your triggers so you can avoid falling back into using those same pathways. If you've gotten anything out of this presentation, I hope you have gotten this, that being hooked on porn is not a character flaw or a sign of weakness, but it truly is evidence of an addiction process at work that has really changed your brain. This is our website, www.yourbrainonporn.com. If you want to learn more, you can visit it. It is a science-based and totally non-commercial site. There you'll find research supporting the points that we have made in this presentation, stories and tips from recovering users. Those are very, very helpful. Frequently asked questions, and you can pose some questions of your own, and many useful articles.